Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Mission Driven Podcast. I'm your host, Travis Walker, and in today's episode, we'll be once again talking to Dr. Paul Brantley, this time about Mission Driven Basics. Mission Driven is an endeavor of the North American Division of Seventh-day Adventists to guide and support pastors, administrators, and church leaders in their effort to revitalize and unify the church's mission for the 21st century. You can learn more about it right now by checking out mission-driven.org. All right, well, if you have been following this podcast for a while, you know that we have been putting out new resources consistently over the last 3 to 6 months. And now we are getting ready to release Mission Driven Basics. And I'm excited to talk to Paul today about how this book can benefit every pastor and leader in North America. So let's get right into it.
Your mission, should you decide to accept it.
Your mission, should you choose to accept it.
Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world.
This tape will self-destruct in 5 seconds.
All right. Well, Paul, man, it is so great to have you back on the podcast again today. How are you doing?
Doing wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for asking.
Yes, we are in mid-February here in Florida, and Paul and I guess we would consider ourselves Floridians now since our residence is here, and we are definitely enjoying the nice, warm sun, aren't we?
Yeah, but I don't want to make everyone feel jealous. The whole nation was wrapped up in snow and wind and all kind of inclement weather, and we have just had the most wonderful February that I can remember. It's 70s and 80s, and today, quite frankly, I'm ready for air conditioning.
Well, we definitely don't wish ill on anybody. I do have several friends who are glorying in the snow, and I've seen many happy skiers and sledders and out there in the world. Of course, our thoughts and prayers are with those in Texas, some who lost their power, and that's always just something that is not good. And we know what that's like here in Florida. When we get our hurricanes, we have to endure that sometimes. But it is good. I hope you're doing well, and I'm excited today because we're going to be talking about mission-driven basics, and this is a new publication that recently came out from the NAD and Advent Source, and it's really just all the collective wisdom of mission-driven over these last 10 years, kind of put in one little handy-dandy workbook. So, Paul, just tell us a little bit about your excitement about mission-driven basics.
Well, let me give you a bit of background. I think it was Einstein that was attributed to saying that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And during the 10 or so years that I've been working away at this whole mission-driven idea, I've tried to make it simpler and simpler and simpler. If you'd go back 10 years and look at what I do, I mean, I would just blush and run out of the room because it was cumbersome, it was complicated, and people got mixed up on the details. And so I think God has blessed us to make this process so simple and transparent that anyone, and I mean that, any leader, any member can understand exactly what it is. I'm going to tell you a story that happened. We were on a trip in the middle of the night. My children were very small. My daughter might have been 4. And I thought, we stopped. She was sleeping. She started to wake up, and I was going to play a trick on her. I asked her, Eileen, where are we? Now, I knew she wouldn't have a clue as to where we were. I mean, we were in the middle of nowhere, absolutely nowhere. And she was sleeping and just woke up. But I just wanted to see what she would say. I don't know what got over me to ask this question, but I did. So she wiped her eyes and she looked at me and she said, "We're here." And I said, "Oh my." She nailed it. She's an existentialist. We are here. And I thought about that. Christ said that some of the simple things God has hid from the wise and given to the simple. You know the text. And that's exactly right. So the idea is, let's make things as simple as possible without losing anything. And that's another Einstein expression. He said, let's be as simple as possible, but not more. In other words, there comes a point where you can be so simple that you lose something in the process. So we've tried to make this mission driven process simple enough for everyone. Now, why everyone? Well, I say everyone because I believe that in their heart of hearts, everyone wants to be mission focused. When we show 100 people the two diagrams, the church with arrows going in different directions and churches with arrows pointed in the same direction, and we ask them, what kind of church would you like to be a part of? 100% or close to it will say, I want to be a part of that church where that's working together, that's resonating, that's feeding on each other, that's working toward something that matters, that's mission focused, that's purposeful. That's the kind of church I want to be. All right. So then my thought was, if all these people want to be that kind of church, be a part of that kind of church, what's holding us up? Because there are not very many churches that look like that. Now, some sort of do, most do to at least a small extent. But I just have an idea that God expects us to be mission driven. I mean, the same way that the early church was so focused on mission that in Acts 17, I think it's verse 6, the folks said, these people have gone crazy. This they're spreading this around the whole world. They couldn't believe it. And that's what I think God has in store for this remnant church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Let's be so focused that we have no time for diversions, for foolishness, for arguments, for cultural divide and stylistically controversy. Let's come together with all our diversity and focused on one thing, and that is mission. So the idea of simplicity is, if everyone wants to be mission driven, or just about everyone, let's make this so simple that they can understand it, and let's make it so motivating that they will want to do it.
Yeah. And I know as a pastor, and I'm sure in your experience as a teacher and as a administrator, that you recognize that we tend to be, especially in the church, event driven rather than mission driven. Why is it so much easier to kind of fall back into being event driven as a local church, but even conference wide, union wide, division wide? I mean, there tends to be this focus on events, and so how do we move away from that? Not that events are bad, but how do we, for somebody who's maybe doesn't understand the difference between being mission driven and event driven, because you mentioned that in the first part of this book about mission drift. So just kind of talk about that for a minute, if you don't mind.
All right. I think those of us who are attempting to live the life of a Christian, we struggle to be truly Christ-centered. This is not just organizationally, but individually. There are so many things that they're the devil's rabbits. We chase after this and the other and one thing or another. And the most fruitful people, and there's some research basis for this, are those who are guided by a sense of purpose. They know where they're going. They know where they want to go. Now, in the church, there's several ways that I could approach it. The idea of mission driven means that we have to be strategic. We can't go cascading over to this event or reacting to that event. We can't do that. We've got to be. I think about mountain climbers. There was a blind mountain climber that had the most successful summit of Everest. There were 18 that were with him. Eric Westover, I think his name is, and he was blind, completely blind, and was able to climb Mount Everest. They did it only because they worked together like a team. They had such a powerful urge to accomplish mission that they wouldn't let anything else get in their way. So the church, I think if we can, number one, learn that mission trumps everything. It trumps events. It trumps financial adventures, and it trumps individualism, and it trumps ego. And we might say a little bit about that later on. It trumps everything because we're looking at this long view. I'll say something else about that, and that is very few of our pastors have been prepared to be strategic. That is to say, to work together in a way that accomplishes mission. And let me ask you, Travis, in your preparation to be a pastor, how much training did you have in actually working strategically for mission?
No, there wasn't a class in school that I can remember. Probably the closest one to strategy would have been church growth. I think that I took from Russell Burrell, and but again, it was evangelism focused, and it didn't necessarily actually get into some of the basic principles behind strategy and visioning and basically creating that synthesis of energy moving in the same direction with the church, and definitely nothing like what we find in this book and other materials that you have been producing to help pastors and leaders think differently.
Yes, and I would back what you said up with some research done by the ministerial department. Over 600 Adventist pastors in the North American Division were asked to rate about 70 different tasks that go into the making of a pastor, a successful pastor. And as they ranked what they felt strongly prepared for and what they felt weakest, you would never guess of the 70 or so items where they felt ill prepared. Well, you probably have guessed it. It was in the area of strategy, working strategically for their church. So this was a real need. And if pastors felt better prepared to work strategically, then I think they would realize some incredible benefits. And that's what we're trying to do, even with mission driven. I don't think that our pastors are intentionally wanting to be blind, or even our church leaders. It's just that this is not a tradition. Our tradition has been, the Lord is coming, let's have some evangelism and let's get the world ready for him to come. I would say that evangelism is a part of mission, but I don't see evangelism as synonymous with mission. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so, because mission, at least the way I understand it, is never changing, and evangelism is just part of a cycle of mission. Some people maybe end up using the term cycle of evangelism, but what they're really saying when they're talking that way, I think, is mission, and maybe looking at evangelism in broader terminology than is normally understood when you say evangelism. But yeah, I even that, I mean, I think I remember, first being introduced to the even this concept of a cycle of evangelism, which is strategic, but
Right.
that wasn't even something that I had a full grasp on, early in my ministry, and especially not connecting the different departments of the church into that. We were just talk about a lot of events and just stuff focused on the outside of the church. But really, I think mission driven does more than that. And it really brings all the departments together. And we're not just working evangelism as part of the church's, uh, you know, function, but it's bringing everything together.
Now that is it. You just nailed it. You see, mission, if I could define mission, it has to do with all the things that we do internally and externally in the church and out of the church in order to bring hope and wholeness to the world around us. That's our mission statement in the North American Division. Essentially, it's to reach the world with hope and wholeness. Reach our worlds. Everyone has a different world to reach. We want to reach them with hope and wholeness. Now, if that's our mission, then strategy says, what are the best mix of plans and actions that go into accomplishing mission? Okay. So therefore, we have to study strategy so we can know how we can mix evangelism as well as church culture, as well as discipleship, as well as ministries. All of these things have to mix in a certain way in order to accomplish our mission. And I will say this. Let me ask you a question. Would you define mission field? If we're talking mission, what is the mission field? Any thoughts on that, Travis? I'm setting you up for something that I want I want to
Yeah,
say.
no, I don't mind at all.
All right, go for it.
Yeah,
Go for it.
so I would say, the mission field for the depending on the entity. So for our church in Daytona Beach, the mission field is the community
Yep.
living in the vicinity, or the reach of the church.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's a conference, then that would be the territory that the conference is administrating over. But yeah, I would say just depending on what level of the church you're in, that would define the mission field, in in those different contexts.
Okay. One of our leaders in the North American Division, one of our departmental directors, came to me and said, Paul, we shouldn't say mission is a territory, mission is people. And I think I understood what he meant. And so I would define mission field in terms of three categories of people. Tell me if you think this makes sense. Number one, the first category is the community. And by that, I mean the public, people not a part of the church. We have to go and reach them with this wonderful message of hope, of our prophetic message of hope and wholeness, our existential lifestyle that we as Adventists are so privileged to have. We have a special message. So we've got to reach the community, the outside world. That's number one. But there's another mission field. The second mission field are people within the church. We have brought in 500,000 people in the last 20 years, thereabouts. We've baptized that many people in the North American Division. If we could have just kept them, and if they could be working and making other disciples, this church could be, instead of 1 million, it would be 5 million. All right, so we've got, first of all, the people outside the church, and then the members in the church, their mission field. The third group are church leaders. They're also a mission field. And I'm reading through the Pauline epistles, and I'm so struck with the Apostle Paul. This morning I was reading about his great passion for the church in Thessalonica and how much he loved them and how much he hurt when they heard it. And he talked about their leaders, and some of them got discouraged. So we have these three mission fields: the public, the members, and the leaders. And strategy says, how can we so equip all three of these entities in such a way that they help us to accomplish mission? So to do that, Pastor, we have to look at what we're doing. Do we have churches that are so friendly that people would want to come there, and where our services are organized around them and around us, but around them, so that everything that we do, even evangelism, see, evangelism must have other concomitant, um, I guess you might say, conditions that make it successful, such as a warm church. You see, so when all the different departments of the church can come together around reaching people with hope and wholeness, then we really have an exciting mission-driven church.
Amen. Amen. So if you were talking to a pastor who had, just newly being introduced to Mission Driven, and they just received a copy of Mission Driven Basics in their mailbox, maybe the conference ministerial just sent them a copy, maybe they got a PDF copy that was emailed to them, and they understand the need, like we were just saying, of kind of this unified push that the church is usually just kind of having all these independent atoms out there doing things, but not necessarily in a strategic way moving forward. So what would you say to this pastor? Like, he just got this book. What would be the first thing that you would want him to do with the book?
The first thing that I'd want him to do after reading the book is to hear what other pastors have said, such as yourself, who have tried this. And we have at least 40 video clips of pastors over and over and over who say the same thing. What they say is, this mission focus has helped us to organize our church in such a way that it's no longer a potluck. Here and there doing this event and that activity, and then there's something that comes up. And I mean, it's just over and over and over. Not only pastors, we have conference presidents who say the same thing. I talked with the conference president just a couple days ago, and he told me, he said, when I went to my conference, it was in serious disarray. I didn't realize it, otherwise I wouldn't have gone there. And he said, what in the world can I do? And then he thought about Mission Driven, because he had worked with me on Mission Driven. And he decided, I'm not going to be pulled into these squabbles and interchurch controversies. I'm going to get folks focused on mission. And he did. He told me within 4 months, the culture of that church had changed. He would not be drawn in. So I think that applies to pastors as well. When you go to your church, there will be members of the church that might want you to come on their side, but you would let them know that the pastor's side is God's side, and God's side is mission. So the first thing I would say is find out what other people have said about it. And second of all, I would advise them to check out something that we just finished this week. And that is the most simple description of the mission-driven process that I have ever seen. It encapsulates all of the main components of mission-driven, and listen to this, and does it in 12 PowerPoint slides. But I'm hoping that as you see those slides, that you'll find that this whole process is not cumbersome, it's not difficult, but it just requires a change of thought, that we get out of our rigid way of doing things and open up our hearts to something that is just creative and refreshing and quite exhilarating.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is described, the process of change is described in habits, right? So I think that people can relate to that when it comes to behavior change. There's 12-step programs out there to help people change behaviors individually. And those 12 steps you could describe as habits, or things that you do on a regular basis. And it's interesting that there's inventories in both
That's
the
correct.
mission driven process and also in recovery. And that's kind of what it is. I mean, it's not like maybe, I mean, that might resonate with some people. It's like if our churches are sick, they need to be in recovery and they need to develop
Hmm.
new habits to change the culture. Just as individually, we need to develop new habits to change behavior that we're no longer wanting to engage in. I think that it is the same process. So it's simple, and yet, like you mentioned, I liked what you said. Connect with the community, right? Because of others who are implementing this, because it can be a little overwhelming if you're trying to do this by yourself.
Correct. Absolutely. Yes. There are so many ways we can go with that. Um, okay, I'm going to pick up on what you just said just now. This is not a cookbook. It's not something you get from Harvard Business School. It's got to be spirit driven. And I would say that's really one of the first, if not the first, component of mission driven. Our hearts have to be surrendered to the Holy Spirit. Now, why do I say that?
Mm-hmm.
I say that because I find that the biggest hindrance to a mission driven church is not money, it's not finances, it's not intelligence, it's ego. Now, by ego, I'm not just referring to people who brag a lot, although that might be one species. I'm thinking of anything that where we put ourselves in front of mission. It could be fear. Oh, I don't think I want to give Bible studies because I've never done it before. Beside, I'm shy. It could be pride. Let me compare myself with oh, the pastor didn't call my name. I should have been recognized from the pulpit. And by all means, don't forget to call me doctor.
Right,
You know,
right.
there are so many different ways that we can be proud, or it could be self indulgence. I don't feel like doing this or that. It could be procrastination. I don't feel like doing it now. It could be like intemperance. I don't feel like stopping eating. I want more. All of these things talk about self. And this morning from my devotional, coincidentally, I was reading where Ellen White said, and I wish I could give you the quote, and I can get it to you later because it's not from a common source. But she makes the statement that when we put on the habits of Christ, this will help us get rid of self. And I'm thinking, wow, does that not apply to the church? What could happen if, like the disciples of old, we came together in an upper room, allow the Spirit of God to come and be in control? We, like them, like they, could turn the world upside down. So these habits that you're talking about work individually, like in a 12-step process, but they also work collectively. Ellen White says, where the character of God is revealed in his people, Christ object lessons, I think some of you know that quote, then he's prepared to come for his own. So, yeah, we need to do quite a bit of self searching. And so the mission driven habits is a structured way for a church to look at itself as to how missional and how strategic it is.
I love that. And I think there's a clear parallel between individual reformation, recovery, mission, for and as a church. I mean, the Bible even uses the term the temple of God to
Yep.
describe the church and individually our bodies. So there's a clear parallel, and I think, as you said, the church is not a just some sort of um, uh, what's the word, a a static um, organization. No, it's dynamic, right? It's made up
Right.
of people, And clearly, if we're going to change as an organization, we have to change as individuals, and we have to be willing to look in the mirror, and say, hey, is the church really fulfilling its potential? Is it really um, you know doing all it can to accomplish the mission God has given us, or have we become content to just, like you said, procrastinate, put things off, just focus on things that are less hard. Yeah, that if that's what you're looking for, then mission driven probably is going to seem a little intimidating. But for those who are really just recognizing their need of a of a reformation, and they see that they want to see acts fulfilled in their local church and their conference, then mission driven can truly be a guidebook that can help along the way. But like you just said, you have to have that spiritual desire, and it has to be spirit led.
Yes, and I believe that we can plan for it to be spirit led. I don't think it has to be some accident. And so when you look at the 10 habits, habit number one says, let's take an inventory to see where we are. And for that habit, then we look at all the habits on a scale from 1 to 10, and churches get together, they talk among themselves, they come to consensus as to where they are. And I will tell you, we've done this scores of times. The average church is probably somewhere around 3 to 4 on a scale from 1 to 10. I have never seen a church that has averaged more than 7 on a scale from 1 to 10. Now, what that tells me is that members themselves recognize that there's a need. And go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna, just from Daytona, when we first took the inventory, we were like a 3.1 or something overall.
Mm-hmm.
And then after implementing these 10 habits, we went within about a year to year and a half to over a 7 in overall scores. And that was, like, again, I wasn't giving them money. I wasn't, these were genuinely the church leaders seeing themselves and seeing how things had changed, and they were answering the questions, and I was just blown out of the water. And so you can really change the culture once you get everybody on board with mission driven.
You can. Now, the one thing about mission driven basics, the basic means we're getting See, we had mission driven excellence. We had a book that came out in 2015 and sold quite a few copies and lots of materials. The basics said, let's get to the real core of what this is all about. And let's make it so easy that every church in North America can do it. Not just churches, but conference offices and union offices. And guess what? The president of our division told me, I want you to focus your attention on mission-driven habits in the North American division office. Okay? So this is something, those habits, it's process, Travis, but it's also outcomes, because every quarter, and I want to emphasize quarter, every church should take a quick inventory to see if they're growing. Well, what is it special about the quarter? If it's once a year, that's not enough. It's like going to the doctor once every 5 or 10 years. You've got to make sure that the momentum stays fresh. So every quarter, the church takes an inventory. And the good news, this is something else that's just come out, is that the process is paperless. It is of such a nature that within a few minutes, a church board, or an entire church for that matter, with their cell phones, can take an inventory and get the results right away. And not only that, the results will stay on display for 2 years so that you can see first quarter, how did we do? Second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. Oh, you have a whole span of 2 years to watch your church grow. And that itself can be exceedingly motivating.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. I had a a little hand in that being developed, and
Yes, you did.
I've just been excited to also test it a little bit, and I know it's just in beta form right now, but yeah, that is definitely going to be a handy dandy tool, because if it's something that you can just include in your regular board meetings,
Right.
and then everybody can do it in a few minutes,
Hmm.
why not just have it as an agenda item on your board? Everybody, once a quarter, we're going to do this, and then have a conversation afterward, and it's going to help people when you start slacking a little bit. It'll be like, hey, I guess we can see we're not doing this as well, so it doesn't become out of sight, out of mind, which I think.
Exactly right.
What,
Yes, and
no, no, go ahead.
someone told me, don't make it just church board, let it be the entire church. And I thought about that and I said, why not? Anyone that has a cell phone can do this. And then I started thinking, and you can tell me what you think about this idea. What would happen if every 13th Sabbath would be mission driven Sabbath? That's once a quarter, every 13th Sabbath, mission driven Sabbath, where there could be testimonials, where there could be sermons, there could be a rally, a Sabbath afternoon rally with all kinds of ways to get the churches involved on mission, a special emphasis once a quarter. At that time, they can take the inventory and they can look at, have they grown? What can they do to grow further? Anything that needs to be corrected? And see, in this way, this whole mission driven concept will not be just another initiative that comes and goes, but it's something that stays with the church. I don't care if pastors come and go, the church is not defined by the pastor specifically. Now, true, pastors have certain gifts that they will leave with the church. But if our churches are pastor driven and not mission driven, guess what happens? Travis, you've brought your church up to a high level. You leave, and a Pharaoh that knows not Joseph comes, and then it's back to square one. And our members tell me this. I know it happens. So, to make it part of the culture, I'm advocating that we do a quarterly activity that we emphasize the mission. Not that we neglect it during the quarter, but I'm just saying a special opportunity to celebrate what the church is doing missionally.
I mean, I love it. I mean, I think it just kind of piggybacks on a tradition that we've always had as an Adventist church of being mission minded on the 13th Sabbath. And in the past, we've, maybe focused more on overseas missions, but why not also, add an emphasis on local mission for the church, and also celebrate the mission that needs to be accomplished around the world too, and support those projects. So yeah,
Exactly.
it's someone called that habit stacking, and I love it. I love that term, habit stacking, where you kind of combine two things together that you're building on the energy of one habit and adding something else to it. So I'm on board, man. Sign me up. And if we can, get an emphasis on mission in NAD on the 13th Sabbath, I'm with you, Paul.
Well, that I just thought about it. It just seems to make good sense. And what could happen if churches throughout the North American division could share ideas? How do we do mission driven in a pandemic? I know some people out there doing some outstanding things. What could our health systems and our universities and colleges, if we could, in our school systems, suppose we had a mission driven educational system. Now, I'm not suggesting that there's no mission going on there, but it needs to be cultured so that we are all working together in unison. there would be no stopping us at a church if we can come together. And I'm very pleased to say that our president, Alex Bryant, is doing exactly that, trying to get all the entities to come together and work together as one. I had the privilege of doing some research for him and discovered that as high as 95 and 96% of all of our different groups, union, conference, hospital, and health system and universities, they like the idea of us coming together. So now let's do it. And that's going to be the theme for the Seventh-day Adventist Church in North America for the next quinquennium. Together in mission. That is our theme.
Wonderful. Well, I'm excited. And I think that's a good, way to kind of transition off this episode and maybe look forward to the next one where we can, discuss, more what that would look like. And I do believe that the best is yet to come. Obviously, if we're believers in the scriptures, we know that even though there's a delay, it's not going to diminish the beautiful result of God's people coming together in the last days and magnifying his name and his mission and his character and his love. And that's what we're here for. That's what Mission Driven is about. And just, Paul, I just want to give you one more, just kind of to close up, so they've picked up the book, they've read through it, they've seen some testimonies, they've gotten excited, and what would be the next thing, that you would say to that pastor, that leader, with the book in hand? What would you ask them to do?
What I would ask them to do is to look at the most recent PowerPoint that we sent out. But I would like for them to do it along with the conference leadership, because Mission Driven is not just about the church, it's about the local conference. And maybe our next podcast, we can talk specifically about some of those steps that can be taken. So I would suggest this. If persons listening to this podcast could make sure that they have a copy of the book, that they've read through it, 66 pages. It's a pretty easy read. In fact, it's quite easy read. And then let's have a podcast, a webinar, or something where we can go through those 12 slides so that you get the overall gist as to what we're trying to do.
All right. Sounds good, Paul. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks again for taking the time to record this episode. Again, we want to encourage you, if you're listening, to subscribe to this podcast, wherever you found this podcast from. We'd love to hear from you. Like we said, check out mission-driven.org. You can sign up for our newsletter there. You can find the resources. I believe the PowerPoint is also going to be put up there as well. If you're currently not signed up for the newsletter, we're working to get that put up there, so you should be able to find that soon. All announcements and everything related to Mission Driven, definitely want to encourage you to sign up for that monthly newsletter. Paul, it's been great to have you. We will talk to you soon, and everyone out there, we wish you the best. God bless.